Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The Tuesday had started like any other Tuesday, which is to say with a quiet sort of predictability that had become the hallmark of my life since Richard passed, and the kids flew the nest. I was Carol, by the way, just a woman tending her small garden of memories and marigolds in a sleepy suburban cul-de-sac. The sun was doing that lovely late morning thing, you know, where it filters through the kitchen window, just so, making little rainbows in the steam rising from my second cup of coffee. I'd been meaning to tackle the overflowing bookshelves in the den, a task I'd put off for, about 6 months, and had finally steeled myself for the dusty endeavor. That's when the doorbell chimed. Now, I don't get many unexpected visitors. The occasional delivery, sometimes Martha from next door wanting to borrow a cup of sugar or share the latest neighborhood gossip. So, a little flutter of curiosity stirred in me as I wiped my hands on my apron and headed for the door. Peeking. Through the peephole, I saw a young man standing on my porch, a book tucked under his arm. It took me a moment to place him. Tall, lanky, with that familiar shock of sandy blonde hair that always seemed to defy a comb. It was Liam, Tom, and Sarah's boy from across the street. Goodness, he wasn't a boy anymore, was he? Must be 27, 28, by now. I hadn't seen him much since he'd gone off to college. I opened the door, a smile already forming. Liam? What a surprise! Come on in. He had a shy smile, the kind that crinkled the corners of his bright blue eyes. Sarah's eyes. Hi, Mrs. Henderson. Hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all, dear. I was just psyching myself up to battle a mountain of books. What brings you by? I stepped back, gesturing him into the hallway. The scent of old paper and lemon polish, my signature home fragrance, seemed to greet him. Mom asked me to return this. He said, holding out the book. It was an old, well-loved copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, one I often lent out. She finished. It last week. And, well, Mom, she gets sidetracked. I chuckled. Sarah was a wonderful woman, but focus wasn't always her strong suit. That she does. Thank you, Liam. Would you like to come in for a moment? I just brewed a fresh pot of coffee, or maybe some iced tea. It's warming up out there. The words were out before I'd really thought them through, just the old habit of hospitality. He hesitated for a split second, just long enough for me to think he'd decline. Coffee sounds great, actually, if it's no trouble. No trouble at all, I assured him, leading the way to the kitchen. Have a seat at the table. My kitchen is sunny, yellow walls a bit cluttered with canisters and recipe books, the window above the sink looking out onto my bird feeder, which was currently hosting a rather boisterous blue jay. Liam sat, placing the Harper Lee Classic carefully on the checkered tablecloth. He looked a little out of place in my cozy, slightly old-fashioned kitchen, dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans. Yet there was an ease about him, too. So, how have you been, Liam? I asked, pouring him a mug of coffee, the dark aroma filling the air. Last I heard you were working, was it in the city? Some kind of tech thing. He took the mug with a grateful nod. Yeah, software development. It's interesting. Keeps me busy. He took a sip of coffee. This is really good coffee, Mrs. Henderson. Call me Carol, please, dear. Mrs. Henderson makes me feel ancient, I said with a light laugh. And the secret to the coffee is a cinnamon stick in the grounds. A genuine smile spread across his face then, transforming his somewhat serious expression. Carol. Okay, cinnamon, huh? I'll have to remember that. He looked around the kitchen, his gaze lingering on the photographs pinned to the corkboard by the phone, pictures of my kids at various ages. Richard and me on a long-ago beach vacation. It's nice in here. Homey, smells like my grandma's house used to. That little comment, so simple, tugged at something in my chest. My own grandmother's kitchen had always been a haven of warmth and comforting smells. Thank you, Liam. That's a lovely compliment. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The only sounds the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the distant hum of a lawnmower. I noticed his hands then, cradling the coffee mug. They were long-fingered, capable-looking hands, not the soft hands of a boy anymore. There were faint ink stains on his right index finger, like he'd been writing. So, did you enjoy the book? I asked, nodding towards To Kill a Mockingbird. It felt like a safe, neutral topic. His expression softened. I actually reread parts of it when Mom was done. It's been years. It's powerful. Still holds up, you know? It really does. I agreed. Atticus. Finch was always a hero of mine. Mine too, he said, his voice a little quieter. It makes you think about things, about doing the right thing, even when it's hard. He looked directly at me then, his blue eyes surprisingly intense. There aren't a lot of Atticuses in the world anymore, are there? His question, so direct and a little melancholic, caught me off guard. It wasn't the sort of thing you expected from your neighbor's son, who just popped over to return a library book. It was the kind of question that usually came after a few glasses of wine with old friends, or in the quiet, searching hours of the night. And that, I suppose, was the first little tremor, the first hint that this wasn't going to be just a polite, superficial chat. The air in my sunny kitchen suddenly felt a little thicker, charged with an unspoken something, and I found myself leaning forward, genuinely wanting to hear what he had to say next. What happened after that simple question? Well, that truly did surprise me. He didn't wait for an answer, not really. It was more of a thought spoken aloud. He traced the rim of his coffee, mug with a fingertip. I mean, he continued, a slight furrow in his brow. Everyone's so quick to judge, so loud with their opinions. But how many are willing to actually stand for something? To listen, it feels like a lost art. I found myself nodding slowly. I know what you mean, Liam. The world feels noisier somehow than it used to, and not always in a good way. I thought of the constant barrage of news, the endless arguments on social media that even I, a reluctant participant, couldn't entirely escape. Exactly, he said, looking relieved that I understood. I work in tech, you know, and it's all about connection. Supposedly, connecting people across the globe. But sometimes I think we've just found more ways to misunderstand each other, faster and louder than ever before. He gave a short, somewhat rueful laugh. Sorry, I didn't mean to get all philosophical on you. It's just something I've been thinking about lately. No, don't apologize, I said, and I meant it. It was refreshing. Actually, how often did I have conversations like this anymore? My friends and I usually talked about our gardens, our grandchildren, the latest aches and pains, important things. Yes, life things, but not often this kind of searching. It's a valid thought, and a little surprising to hear from someone your age. If you don't mind me saying, I guess I associate that kind of world weariness with us older folks. He smiled, a genuine, almost boyish grin this time. Maybe I'm just an old soul, or maybe it's the books. Mom always said I had my nose in a book from the time I could read. Yours included, he added, gesturing to the copy of Mockingbird. This one, The Great Gatsby. Fahrenheit 451, they make you think. They do indeed, I murmured. my mind drifting to my own dusty shelves in the den, a silent testament to a lifetime of seeking understanding through stories. It's funny you mention Fahrenheit 451. I was just thinking about rereading that. It feels more relevant than ever these days, doesn't it? The idea of knowledge being dangerous, of people willingly giving up the right to think for themselves. Liam's eyes lit up. It really does. The way Beatty talks about why books had to be burned, it's chilling because you can see shades of it happening. People choosing easy entertainment over anything that challenges them. He leaned forward a little. The earlier shyness completely gone, replaced by an animated passion. I actually tried to talk about it with some guys at work, and they just looked at me like I had two heads. They were more interested in the latest superhero movie or a viral video. I felt a pang of something akin to recognition, not because I discussed dystopian novels with my peers often, but because I knew that feeling of holding a thought or a passion that didn't quite fit with the people around you. It can be hard to find people who want to dig a little deeper, I acknowledged. Yeah, he said, then looked down at his mug, a flicker of that earlier reserve returning. So, thanks for letting me ramble. Liam, I said gently. It wasn't rambling. It was a conversation, and a very interesting one. I topped off his coffee and then my own. The afternoon sun had shifted, now casting longer shadows across the kitchen floor. The blue jay had flown off, replaced by a pair of chattering sparrows. Tell me, what else have you been reading or thinking about? It was a simple invitation, but it felt like opening a door I hadn't realized was closed. He hesitated for only a moment before a small smile touched his lips. Well, since you asked, and just like that, the conversation flowed again, easier, this time. We talked about books, yes, but it wasn't just about plots and characters. It was about the ideas they sparked, the way they made us feel, the questions they left us with. He spoke with an earnestness, a surprising depth of thought that I found myself drawn to. He talked about the pressures of his fast-paced job, the feeling of being a small cog in a very large machine, and his quiet desire to do something more, something that mattered, though he wasn't quite sure what that was yet. Listened, truly listened, perhaps in a way I hadn't listened to anyone in a long time. There was no agenda, no need to offer solutions or advice, just the simple act of hearing another person's thoughts, their quiet hopes and anxieties. And in his words, I found echoes of my own younger self, that period of searching and questioning that seems to fade with the routines and responsibilities of middle age. He asked me questions too, about Richard, about my children, about what it was like growing up in a different era. He wasn't just being polite. There was a genuine curiosity in his voice, a desire to understand. I found myself sharing things I hadn't spoken of in years, memories that lay dormant, coated in the dust of everyday life. I talked about my early dreams of being a journalist, a passion I'd set aside when motherhood called. I even confessed my secret love for old black and white movies, the kind with witty dialogue and glamorous stars. You wanted to be a journalist, he asked, his expression thoughtful. Why didn't you pursue it later, after your kids were grown? The question was direct, but not unkind. I paused, looking out the window at the now peacefully feeding sparrows. Life, I suppose, I said with a sigh. It has a way of setting you on a path, and sometimes you forget there were other trails you once wanted to explore, and then it just feels too late. I don't think it's ever too late to explore a trail, Carol, Liam said softly, his gaze steady on mine. Maybe just in a different way. His words, so simple, so earnest, landed with a surprising weight. It wasn't a platitude. It felt like a genuine belief he was offering me. And in that moment, looking at this young man, my neighbor's son, who I'd only ever known as a child from across the street, I felt a connection that was as unexpected as it was profound. The shock wasn't a sudden event. No crashing cymbals or dramatic revelation. It was a quieter thing, a dawning awareness. The shock was realizing how much common ground could be found in the most unlikely of places, with the most unlikely of people. It was the surprise of being truly seen, and of seeing someone else, perhaps, for the first time. The afternoon was wearing on, the light outside turning golden, and I knew this conversation was something special, something I wouldn't soon forget. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 3, a soft, sonorous sound that seemed to mark a shift in the afternoon's gentle rhythm. Liam glanced towards the sound, a flicker of awareness in his eyes, as if remembering that time outside this kitchen was still moving forward. "Wow, 3 o'clock already," he said, a note of surprise in his voice. "I should probably let you get back to your day. I've taken up so much of your time." "Not at all, Liam," I said, and it was the truest thing I'd said all day. "This has been, well, it's been a real pleasure. I meant it. The mountain of books in the den was completely forgotten, and in its place was a feeling of lightness, of unexpected camaraderie." He stood up, and I did too. For a moment, we just stood there by the table, the remnants of our coffee and conversation hanging in the warm air between us. There was a comfortable silence, not awkward, but one that acknowledged that something meaningful had passed between us. "Thank you again for the coffee, Carol," he said, his earlier shyness replaced by a warm sincerity, "and for the conversation. It's not every day you get to talk about Atticus Finch and dystopian futures with someone who actually gets it." I smiled. The pleasure was all mine. "Liam, it's good to know there are still people out there reading the good books and thinking the big thoughts." He picked up To Kill a Mockingbird from the table, holding it for a moment. "You know," he said, looking at the worn cover, "I have a few books at my parents' place. Some I think you might enjoy. Old sci-fi, mostly, but the kind that really makes you think. Like you said, maybe I could bring them over sometime if you'd like, that is." The offer was casual, yet it felt like more than just a polite gesture. It was an opening, a possibility of future conversations. And I found myself, to my own surprise, genuinely hoping he would. "I like that very much, Liam," I said. "I'm always looking for new old books, if that makes any sense." He grinned. "Makes perfect sense to me." He headed towards the hallway, and I walked with him at the front door. He paused, turning to face me. The afternoon light from the sidelight windows illuminated his face, highlighting the earnestness in his blue eyes. "Seriously, Carol?" he said, his voice a little lower, more earnest. "Thanks. I've been feeling a bit adrift lately. My job is fine, pays the bills, but sometimes I wonder what the point of it all is, you know? Talking with you today, it helped. It made me feel a bit more grounded." His admission, so open and vulnerable, touched me deeply. Here was this young man on the cusp of his life, grappling with the same existential questions that people of all ages face. And he was sharing that with me, a woman practically a stranger to him an hour before. It was a gift, that kind of trust. "Liam," I said, my voice equally soft. "We all feel adrift sometimes, no matter how old we are. The important thing is to keep seeking those moments of connection, those conversations that make us feel grounded. They're out there, sometimes in the most unexpected places. I smiled, thinking of how this ordinary Tuesday had become anything, but he met my gaze, a look of profound understanding passing between us. It wasn't a romantic connection, not in any conventional sense. It was something else, something perhaps rarer, and in its own way, more precious. It was a meeting of minds, a recognition of shared humanity, a moment of genuine empathy that transcended age and circumstance. This was the real shock, the beautiful, quiet surprise of it all. The world suddenly felt a little less noisy, a little more hopeful. "I'll see you around, Carol," he said, opening the door. "You too, Liam, and tell your mom." I said hello. He nodded, gave a small wave, and then he was gone, walking down the porch steps and across the street. I watched him for a moment, a tall, thoughtful figure disappearing into the familiar landscape of our neighborhood. A landscape that somehow looked a little different now, imbued with a new layer of meaning. I closed the door slowly, leaning against it for a moment. The kitchen was quiet again, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of the neighborhood. The scent of coffee still lingered, but now it was mingled with the fainter, more intangible aroma of shared thoughts and unexpected kinship. I walked back into the kitchen, my gaze falling on the 2 empty coffee mugs still on the table, such ordinary objects, yet they felt like artifacts from a significant encounter. I hadn't battled the mountain of books in the den. I hadn't done any of the chores I'd planned. Instead, I had stumbled into something far more enriching. I had connected with another human being on a level I hadn't anticipated, and it had stirred something within me, something that had been dormant for too long. It was a feeling of aliveness, of curiosity, of a renewed sense of wonder about the world and the people in it. My neighbor's son had come by to return a book, and in doing so, he had returned a piece of myself to me. I walked over to the window above the sink, looking out at my small garden. The marigolds were blazing orange in the late afternoon sun. Richard had always loved marigolds. He'd said they were like little suns, even on cloudy days. For a long time, after he passed, looking at them had brought a pang of sadness. But today they just looked bright, cheerful, full of life. Liam's words about it never being too late to explore a trail, even in a different way, echoed in my mind. My old dream of being a journalist. It wasn't about bylines in a big newspaper anymore. Maybe it was about something simpler. Maybe it was about capturing stories, even small ones. Maybe it was about paying attention, truly paying attention to the world around me, to the quiet dramas and unexpected connections that unfolded every day, even in a sleepy suburban cul-de-sac. Thought about the conversation, the ease with which we'd moved from polite C_H_skitty to deeper reflections. There had been no pretense, no awkwardness, just a natural unfolding. It was a reminder that genuine connection doesn't require grand gestures or dramatic events. Sometimes it's as simple as 2 people sharing a cup of coffee and a willingness to listen. Truly listen. The initial shock I'd mentally noted wasn't about scandal or drama, but the profound realization of how easily we can misjudge or overlook the people around us, even those we see every day. Liam wasn't just Tom and Sarah's boy anymore. He was a thoughtful, searching individual with a rich, inner life, someone capable of deep conversation and surprising insights. And perhaps in his eyes, I wasn't just Mrs. Henderson, the quiet widow from across the street. Perhaps he saw something more too. That evening, instead of turning on the television out of habit, I found myself pulling out an old empty notebook and a pen. The ink flowed surprisingly easily. I didn't write about grand philosophies or try to solve the world's problems. I just wrote about the afternoon, about the sunlight in the kitchen, the smell of coffee and cinnamon, the earnest look in a young man's eyes as he talked about books and dreams and the search for meaning. I described the way the conversation had meandered like a gentle stream, touching on unexpected shores. It felt good to write, to put those thoughts and feelings into words. It was like exploring one of those forgotten trails Liam had mentioned. Not a path back to an old dream, perhaps, but a new path, one that felt uniquely my own. I realized that the personal discovery wasn't just about seeing Liam differently. It was about seeing myself differently, too. I wasn't just a collection of past roles, wife, mother, widow. I was still Carol, a person capable of new connections, new thoughts, new growth. The encounter had been brief, just a couple of hours, on an ordinary Tuesday, but its ripples were continuing to spread. It had nudged me out of a comfortable, perhaps too quiet routine. It had reminded me of the joy of intellectual companionship, the spark that comes from a meeting of minds. And it had done so with such mutual respect, such a gentle unfolding of shared vulnerability. A few days later, I saw Sarah, Liam's mom, at the grocery store. "Carol!" she'd exclaimed. "Liam told me he had such a nice chat with you the other day. He really enjoyed your coffee and your company. He even said you talked about some of those serious books he likes." She beamed. "It's so good to see him connecting with people. He can be a bit reserved, you know." I smiled. "He's a wonderful young man. Sarah, you and Tom did a great job." And I meant it. He was a testament to the fact that thoughtfulness and depth weren't lost qualities. The world might be noisy, as I'd said to him, but there were still quiet places, quiet conversations where real understanding could be found. My little kitchen had been one of them that Tuesday afternoon. I didn't know if Liam would bring over those sci-fi books he'd mentioned. It didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. What mattered was the experience itself, the unexpected gift of that afternoon. It had been a reminder that life, even in its quieter chapters, could still hold surprises, still offer moments of profound connection and personal growth. It had shocked me, yes, but in the best possible way. It had woken me up a little, reminded me to keep my own doors and my mind open, and for that I was incredibly grateful. The book he returned was about justice and empathy, and in a small, personal way, our conversation had been about that too, about seeing each other clearly and connecting with respect and an open heart. And that, I thought, was a story worth remembering.